Welcome, everyone, to our final session of the day, and thank you all for staying with us. This is one that I am personally very excited about and very honoured about chairing. Very excited about showing two of the most amazing speakers we've had today, I think, to talk to us about freedom, the internet, and democracy, and how to control technology without controlling people. Our first speaker is Maria Ressa, who's a Nobel Prize winner and the CEO of Rappler, a Filipino online news website. Maria has been one of the most important investigative reporters in Southeast Asia, working notably with CNN, a campaigner against fake news, the weaponization of social media, and has faced personal and legal threats from the Filipino government over her work exposing corruption and human rights violations. In the last few days alone, another Filipino journalist has been killed, the fourth since Marcos took over in 2022, and almost 200 have died since democracy was first restored back in 1986 in the country. And we're also honoured to have Shoshana Zuboff, the author of The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, an international bestseller that decodes the digital era as global tech companies such as Google and Facebook, those that which travel over some of the pipes we talked about today, ask us to swap privacy for convenience, and how this information is being used to influence and modify our behaviour with terrible consequences for democracy and freedom. She is Professor Emeritus at Harvard Business School. Both join us live but remotely from their respective offices. We've been trying to get them here, but it's been very difficult, and I really appreciate the fact that they have joined us today. So Maria, to start with you, I'd love you just to talk to us and talk to the audience about your life, your journalism, and the lessons that you've learned in that period. The threats, the arrests, this is an incredible adventure you've had, but you've seen so many dangers in doing so. Can you tell us a bit about what you've learned about this topic, about how the authorities are using information and using technology?
I think this is a global trend, and what we've seen in the Philippines since about 2014, which was when information operations really began to change history. Marcos was our dictator for almost 21 years, ousted in a people power revolt in 1986. Now his only son and namesake, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., is our president, elected overwhelmingly last year, when in 2014, we watched history change in front of our eyes, right? Changing the name Marcos from a kleptocrat who stole over 10 billion US dollars to the greatest leader the Philippines has ever known. In terms of what we have suffered, look, by February, it'll be my 38th year as a journalist. And what we suffered, is similar to what other journalists in other parts of the world have suffered. Information operations coming bottom up. You say a lie 1 million times on social media, it becomes a fact. That attack on us seeded a meta-narrative. In my case, it's journalist equals criminal. And then a year later, it came top down from our president himself. A week later, I got my first subpoena. Beginning in 2019, in a little over a year, I received 10 arrest warrants, 10 criminal cases. The good thing is that now we are down from 2019 until today to 2 criminal charges of those 10, but we still face closure on a daily basis. We continue going. This is a difficult time for journalists because of the corruption in our information ecosystem. Shoshana's work has been amazing to help us unravel that.
Amazing stuff. So, I mean, journalism, from what you're saying, and indeed other people, other investigative journalists I've spoken to within my career as well, I mean, it really feels like journalism is under more threat now than it's ever been before. I mean, there's just so many different pressures, so many different ways that you can disaggregate the media from different discussions. Really tough. I mean, how do you see this playing out now? How do you see things evolving within this story?
Unfortunately, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And it really starts with data, how we are being insidiously manipulated by data on social media, for example, which is the world's largest distributor of news, for example, is Facebook, now called Meta. And you know what's happened to Twitter, now called X, after Elon Musk bought it, right? On these platforms, as early as 2018, MIT came out with a study that said lies spread 6 times faster. Our data in the Philippines showed that if it is a lie and then you add fear, anger, and hate, You lace it, it spreads even faster. Journalists are the target because the goal is not to necessarily make you believe one thing, but to make you distrust everything. That's about to get worse with generative AI, which was rolled out in November 2022. We're going to see this sharp exponential slope where you are not going to be able to tell what is real from what is fiction.
Yeah, yeah, and journalism is all about telling that truth. Shoshana, Maria has mentioned your work already, and we're starting to talk about social media to an extent as well. So let's talk now, if you can, about your work within the surveillance capitalism, and if possible, about how, we can maybe then start talking about how best we can think about protecting our liberty and freedom of thought and action as well. But first of all, to introduce us to the concept, the idea of surveillance capitalism, where it's led us today.
Let's talk about surveillance capitalism one word at a time. Let's start with capitalism, and then we'll move on to surveillance. Because, one of the things that we all need to combat the terrors that Maria is describing is we need situational awareness. We need an unvarnished, a clear understanding of what is really happening today. One idea I picked up from your discussions this morning is the idea that there used to be many different digital ecosystems, and now it's turning into one solid ecosystem. Well, that one solid ecosystem is one solid economic logic of surveillance capitalism, which is why we really need to get what it's all about. So the first thing I would say is that surveillance capitalism was born in financial emergency. It was born in Google during the dot-com bust. And it came about because of one big discovery and one big idea. The discovery was that everything we do that touches the internet leaves a trail of signals, behavioral signals. And it turns out that those signals are very predictive of our future behavior. That was a huge discovery at Google around 2000, 2001. And then that discovery was hooked up with a really, really big idea. And that idea was that you could use those signals to create predictions of human behavior, and that those predictions could be bundled and sold as commodities in exactly the same way that we sell tons of wheat as commodities or barrels of oil as commodities. And this new commodity market in human-generated data could be as big and as lucrative as anything that the world had ever seen. So if we're going to do that, now we begin to explain some of the things that Maria has mentioned. If we're going to drive human-generated data through this kind of process of commoditization, we need a lot of it. We need it fast. We need volume. We need speed. And the enemy of volume and speed is friction. Friction means systems that figure out whether something is true or false, whether something is corrupt or has integrity, whether it refers to the real world or is just some crazy thing that's made up and has those characteristics of drawing more people to engage with it to produce, guess what? More signals, more data. This is how surveillance capitalism was born. And what this did was allow Google, first of all, to break through finally into that new world of how to monetize data, which was, of course, the cause of the dot-com bust. No one knew how to monetize data. Now, where does the surveillance come from in this phrase? It's not meant to be melodramatic. The founders of Google understood right from the start that they were going to be invading people's private experience. They were going to be lifting signals that told them things about people that users, individuals, citizens never consciously chose to disclose. All of this was happening outside of people's awareness. And the founders like Larry Page and Sergey Brin were terrified that if anybody found out what they were actually doing, they would be shut down, that users would rebel in anger and disgust, that lawmakers would be motivated to finally create privacy laws in the United States of America that would make this kind of activity actually criminal. And so what they understood right from the start was that it had to be secret. It had to be done through the one-way mirror. In other words, it all depended on surveillance, secretly being able to extract these signals, turn them into data, claim them as the private property of the corporation, corporate assets, in order to turn them into the commodities for these new behavioral future markets, which first express themselves, as we all know now, in the behavioral advertising revolution that began at Google. All of their freedom to do what they call innovate, all of their freedom depended then and depends now on acting in the shadows. Anything that they do that is fully disclosed, transparent, out in the open, inevitably connects with user repugnance, rebellion, anger, and rejection. And so even today, we are living in this world of gaslit communications where we cannot really know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what effects it actually has on us as individuals and as communities, as societies, and as democracies. This is now a global institutional order. It's not just the tech companies. It's made its way through every industry, every sector. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I really encourage you to look at this Mozilla Foundation research that was published just last month, which now describes how the 25 leading car companies around the world, full-on surveillance capitalism, connecting to our behavior in our automobiles, online and offline, using hidden cameras, sensors, devices. Anytime we use a phone to connect to devices within our automobiles, using telematics, tracing everything we do on their websites, and collecting vast troves of personal data, everything from sexual orientation to political behavior and everything you can think of in between. And this is just one example of how surveillance capitalism has now become the dominant economic paradigm across all of our economies, all of our sectors.
Yeah, you spoke in very in great depth about the about what's happening. But there'll be people out there who say, well, yes, but what's the problem there? This is modern capitalism. This is selling me oranges when I want an orange, and selling me pens when my ink runs out, and telling me who to hang out with because they're the people I kind of like. There is a societal advantage to this. This is not necessarily a bad thing, is it, or is it?
Well, so let's talk about that. It turns out that when capitalism depends upon the commodification, the gathering and production, manufacture of human data, and the sale of human data to predict human behavior, there are a range of harms that are unleashed for us as individuals, for our societies, and ultimately for the very viability of a democratic society that are pretty terrifying. And I'm going to name these harms very quickly, and you'll see how much these harms are constructing the world in which Maria and other journalists live today, as well as the world in which each one of us lives today. We begin with the most basic thing, which is the destruction of privacy. What I've described to you is, in the last 2 decades, the wholesale destruction of privacy. We still have people who talk about privacy, data protection, privacy laws. But the fact of the matter is that privacy, even as we thought about it in the year 2000, no longer exists. Every signal that is picked up by these this world now saturated with internet-enabled sensors, devices, online, offline, there is no more privacy. So that has very specific consequences for the kind of lives we lead, beginning with the idea that in order to generate all this data, all of these systems are designed by what I call blindness by design. The systems have to take in signals. It doesn't matter what those signals are. Are they true or false? Are they corrupt or do they have integrity? And that means that information corruption, that predominance of disinformation, misinformation, which is constantly overwhelming information integrity, that becomes driven by the way these systems have to be engineered in order to get the economic advantages that they're designed to achieve. Now, when you have a cluster of companies beginning with big tech, but now moving through the economy, and these companies have vast troves of human data, this creates a new kind of world. This is a world that we've never lived in before. We've been talking about AI on and off today, but the really deep fact about AI is that it cannot exist without these huge troves of human data, which are consolidated, first of all, within the tech giants. So these are the companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Meta. These are the companies that have the huge troves of human data. Now, let me just give you a tiny example of what I'm talking about. Even in 2018, a leaked memo from Facebook described its AI hub as ingesting trillions of human data points every day to produce thousands of models of human behavior every day, to produce 6 million predictions of human behavior every second. This is the kind of scale that we're talking about. So now we're in a new world with a new kind of inequality. The difference between what I can know and what can be known about me by these corporate private entities that have no obstacles, no laws to prevent them from collecting this kind of data that allows them to know everything about people, about communities, about societal dynamics, and ultimately to use that power not only for its economic payoff, for its commercial leadership, but to use that as a new form of social power, a new form of governance power. So the ultimate uses here, the ultimate expression of this new social power and governance power, this is what we see taking the forefront now when we look at the surveillance capitalism institutional order and how it behaves. The first thing we know is that when you have so much data about people, individuals, and populations, they're now able to use all of that insight for what they call targeting. A whole range of subliminal cues that allow them to come into our lives with certain kinds of messages that are amplified, certain kinds of messages that are recommended, certain kinds of messages that are repeated over and over again. And this is how they shape and modify behavior from a distance. No one appears at your door holding a gun to your head. This is all done through the digital milieu, through the milieu of this illicit but not illegal data that they are allowed to now own, that tells them everything about us and about our societies.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we see increasing evidence that they are willing to use their unilateral and unfortunately unaccountable control over critical infrastructure in our societies. For example, communications. And they are not only able but willing to use this control over critical infrastructure to go head to head with democratic institutions over who will govern. And we're seeing examples of this much more frequently. One of the most important was in Europe during the height of COVID, when it was the tech companies led by Apple and Google who insisted on going into battle with the European Commission, the European Union, and the individual member states over who would control and communicate contract tracing and exposure notification data that was actually critical to our governments in the efforts of public health for how to track and control the COVID virus. But now we're seeing it again in this great AI debate. And it is the companies who have all the data about us, the companies who have cornered the scientists, the science, the computer capabilities in order to produce AI. And it is the companies who are now leading the governments and dictating to the governments what is the best way to bring these new capabilities to market and to use in our homes, in our businesses, and so on. And once again, we see our government sort of standing down and allowing these companies to take a leadership position in dictating terms. And I hope this is a subject that we can talk about some more. So what we see to wrap up in this large spectrum of harms is it begins with what we give up as individuals and how that changes our lives. But it quickly becomes a collective problem, a problem of the kind of societies we live in. Who has the social power? Who has the governance power? Who has the wealth? Who knows? And who is known?
Yeah.
And this is the imbalance of power that is challenging the prospect of democracy.
Yeah, yeah. Maria, I mean, nodding throughout that. I mean, lots to respond to. I mean, to tell us a bit about how you've seen this, actually on the ground in terms of how social media and how technology is manipulating society's choices, citizens' choices, and just to get a sense of how social media, the dangers of social media that you've seen in your life.
Well, it's exactly what we've lived through, right? Like something very simple. The Philippines is Facebook country for 6 years in a row up until last year. Filipinos spent the most time online and on social media globally. And one algorithm that was chosen by the platforms, and they all use this friends of friends recommendation algorithm, which is for growth, right? So in 2016, for example, we did not argue what the facts were in the Philippines, but that friends of friends algorithm, 2016 was the year the political dominoes began to fall. The information operations, the information warfare, which is geopolitical power exploiting what Shoshana just described for you, what is an advertising marketing technology tool while geopolitical power comes in. When they exploited it in 2014, it took roughly 2 years. 2016, the political dominoes began to fall. Duterte was elected in the Philippines. About a month later, you had Brexit, and then you had all of the elections after that, right? So let me go to that Friends of Friends algorithm that they used. So here we are. We didn't challenge what the facts were, but after Duterte was elected, if you were pro-Duterte, the Friends of Friends algorithm moved you further right. If you were anti-Duterte, you moved further left. And every day that nothing was done and the Friends of Friends algorithm grew both your network on social media and the platform itself, this division grew and grew. That's only one. Another one on YouTube, a recommendation algorithm, a clustering algorithm, essentially took a very far-right fringe figure, Bolsonaro, and clustered him with every conspiracy theory that you had. And this is a Harvard study that was done. And what they found was this clustering recommendation algorithm brought Bolsonaro from the far right to the presidency and was behind the January 8th violence, right? Similar things in every country around the world. Let me just say why this is critical, and I've said this over and over since 2016. What happens is lies spread faster, right? You can say a lie a million times, it becomes a fact. Those 3 sentences I say, if you don't have facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these 3, that's what's been broken down by the system. We have no shared reality. How can we define or solve a problem? You cannot have democracy. That's the problem that we have. And since then, what's happened, and you're seeing this as a global shift from democracy to authoritarian to fascism in many parts of the world, right? And what is that? Because if you don't have integrity of facts, if your journalists are under attack, and news organizations tend to be the first attacked, journalists, I could have gone to jail for actually more than a century. Those cases that have been dismissed now mean, oh, I'm only facing 30 some odd years in jail. But all of these the weaponization of the law came after the corruption of the facts. So now you have a place where corruption of facts, you don't have integrity of facts. How do you have rule of law? You don't have integrity of facts. How do you have integrity of elections? And I think this is the last point that really makes it clear, because we are on the precipice. In 2024, we are going to have 54 countries, more than 60 elections that are critical in 54 countries. 1 in 3 people around the world will be voting in 2024. The 3 largest democracies, Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim population, India, and of course the United States, right? If we are being insidiously manipulated for power and money, the way Shoshana has laid it out, then how are we going to have the freedom to choose, right? You're seeing this play out right now in the Middle East, right? Just looking at, I haven't mentioned TikTok, but looking at data from the United States right now, you have something like anti-Israel content is dominating TikTok among 18 to 24 years old, 447 million views versus 16.5 million views in the last 30 days. This is in the United States alone, right? There's been talk about who puts their thumb on the scale. This is fascinating. I mean, I wish it wasn't our reality, but this is what's at stake for us in the world. Who controls us?
Mm-hmm. I mean, but let's go into that question, because there's the large tech companies, the oligopoly, you could argue, of technology giants, some state, some not, some quasi-state, and then the governments themselves. But is that a tacit collusion, an overt collusion, or an accidental collusion? Is this a deliberate or accidental sort of tie-up between effectively tools and the state? I mean, Maria, what do you think about that from what you have seen? I mean, are people just making money out on the back of this, and they're just happy to do so?
it's an exploitation of the weaknesses of the way the system is set up, right? You have a system that's set up where the business model, we didn't really name it until Shoshana named it. It's surveillance capitalism. This business model, which is taking our data and essentially using it to insidiously manipulate us, that is what micro-targeting is. This system is exploited by power. And that can be your domestic politics, that can be geopolitical power. One of the things that we've seen in the data released by the United States, for example, at the end of 2018 for the 2016 elections, right, is that 126 million Americans were touched by Russian information warfare. And the goal here is not to make you believe one thing. It is to pound open the fractures of society so you believe nothing. So civil society, civic engagement is further weakened so that chaos reigns. Let me talk about it in the Philippines. What we saw, and we were really at the forefront of this because we live on social media. I drank the Kool-Aid. We set up Rappler, the company that I co-founded, first on Facebook. And if its search was better than what it was in 2011 to 2012, we may not have set up a website. But right now what we're seeing is that the system that makes the most money, surveillance capitalism, does so at the expense of the will of the people in these technology platforms. And it's about to get worse because generative AI can literally take the video, my video, Shoshana's video, and overlay on top of us, make us say and do things that we've never done. This is coming our way.
Shoshana, lots to talk about there. I mean, deep fakes and the use of AI clearly is going to, compound so many of these issues, right? And but just tell me, I mean, at what point can technology be used to further democratic goals as well? There must be some hope in this sort of story. There must be ways, and to Maria's point, I mean, she uses digital platforms, she uses online platforms to get her message across as well. That it's not just a one-story thing here, hopefully.
It's not just a one-story thing. And another phrase that caught my attention in your last discussion was the idea that you can't stop the wind. Folks, if there's one thing that I really want you to take away from our discussion, it's that what we're talking about is not the wind. What we're talking about are systems of wealth and power that are created by people for their own advantage. They exploit us for others' aims, be they economic, be they political, social power, governance power. It's all building these different dimensions of power and economic advantage. This is not the wind. This is not an organic force. This is not something that we cannot stop. We can stop it, but we have not stopped it. We're 2 decades into the digital century, and these systems are still growing strong. We're 2 decades into surveillance capitalism, and we still have the tech companies driving their lobbyists through the European Union, spending more millions of dollars than have ever been spent before. We still have the tech leaders appearing in the White House and then in the Congress, supposedly to collaborate on reining in AI, and then turning around and supporting an association that has just successfully, in a court in Northern California, got a judge to issue an injunction against the age-appropriate design code, which had become passed into law in California, on the grounds that it was unconstitutional because it challenges the free speech of the tech company. Right? So that's the world we're in today. This is not the win. What it requires to change things is to understand that we're talking about governance and power. We're talking about a battle for the future of knowledge and for the future of society in an information civilization, which is the world we live in today. That means that we, the people, have to begin to mobilize together. This is in the realm of politics, where we must insist that our lawmakers recognize the threats that we now live under. And we have to begin to articulate the new charters of rights, the rights over knowledge. Who gets to know? Who gets to decide? We have to articulate the new legislative frameworks. And most of all, we have to articulate the new kinds of institutions that are going to keep us safe in a digital century that is still has the capacity to be a democratic century. This mobilization has not yet occurred. And the very fact that so many of us think that what Marie and I have been describing is somehow inevitable, unstoppable, like the wind, that shows how much they have corrupted our thought and made us feel that there's nothing we can do about this. This is political action. Let me just finish this thought by saying, democracy is a fragile thing and always has been. Every generation is called to shore up, to come to the frontier where democracy is under threat and must be sustained. Every generation is called to fight for the privilege of self-governance. Surveillance capitalism and what it has done to our societies and our democracies is the call that we must answer now. Every democracy-loving country, every society that has aspirations to become a democracy, this is the fight that we must engage in. This is the call.
Maria, we're running out of time, but just to conclude, you've written a book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, to follow on from Shoshana's powerful words. I mean, how do you stand up to a dictator, and can we?
Look, at the end of the book, I wrote in a 10-point action plan that's been signed by more than 300 Nobel laureates, civil society groups, people who are aware of the data and are studying that data. And let me just boil that down to 3 basic points, right? The first one is that we have to stop surveillance for profit. This business model literally takes away agency. That's the first. The second is that we have to stop coded bias, because what's been coded in are all of if you've been marginalized in the real world, if you're a woman, LGBTQ+, if you are marginalized, you are further marginalized online. And that phrase, coded bias, comes from that MIT student who tried to do her assignment on AI, and she's a Black woman, and she had to put a white mask on before the AI recognized her face. So number 2, stop coded bias. And finally, the last one, and this is critical, is that journalism is an antidote to tyranny. Essentially, we don't want to leave you like depressed, but we do want to move you to act. The EU has won the race of the turtles. It's put the DSA, the Digital Services Act, in motion, and we're kind of seeing, the Brussels effect versus the other way, which is the Elon Musk effect, right? You finally have a law that could take away 6% of a global revenues of any of these platforms if they violate it. But then you also have the Elon Musk effect, where the very people, the trust and safety teams, have been fired, right? The amount of people working on the generation of the tech versus the people looking at safety is down. It's less than 100 people as of the end of 2022. We can embrace the technology. There are fascinating things it can do, but not at this pace, which is an abdication of responsibility to protect each of us using the technology. Insidious manipulation in a democracy, that must stop. Otherwise, we lose free will, we lose the quality of our elections, we don't have integrity of elections.
Amen to all of that, and thank you both so much for your time this afternoon. I'm supremely grateful that we at least have the technology that's delivered you here today to talk to us. Phenomenal words. Thank you so much.